Beneath the uniform discipline and the march of boots, there lurk tales so true and disturbing they defy all reason. Scarier Things brings you a trio of true scary stories from the military vaults, where valor meets the visceral and bravery borders on the bizarre. These are not just any horror stories. They are accounts of scary true stories that will march straight into the depths of your psyche. From the echoes of the battlefield to the whispers of the barracks, these true horror stories of the armed forces will deliver chilling scares that no armor can shield against. Gear up for an operation into the unknown, where every shadow could be a true stalker and every order could lead to the unthinkable. This is Scarier Things, signing in for duty. First story. In the realm of true horror stories, I bring to you a STr&x tale from the Vietnam War, narrated by my father who served from 1960 to 1962. Now in his mid-80s, he has given me permission to share this scary true story, though we choose to remain anonymous. My father's role in the war was diverse, but the most terrifying was his stint as a tunnel rat. This role involved performing underground search and destroy missions in the labyrinthine tunnels of Vietnam. One such mission, embarked upon by my father and two of his comrades, forms the crux of this true stalker story. The trio was crawling through a deep, eerily silent tunnel, their hearts pounding with the fear of instant death. Suddenly, they heard faint cries of a woman echoing through the tunnel. As they ventured deeper, the cries became louder and clearer, prompting them to hasten their pace, fearing a hostage situation. They reached a small room, barely large enough to stand half-crouched. The room was sparsely furnished with a small table, a lit lantern, two broken chairs, and a locked safe box. However, the cries had ceased, replaced by an overwhelming stench of death that filled the tunnel. Venturing further, they entered a final room, a dead end with no further tunnels. The sight that met their eyes was horrifying. The room was strewn with mutilated bodies, including that of a woman. The gruesome scene was so chilling that they had to retreat. As they crawled back, the woman's cries for help echoed again, freezing them in their tracks. They had seen the end of the tunnel. There were no living beings. Yet the cries were coming from the direction they had just left. Fear gripped them as they hurried back, my father constantly looking back, expecting to see a figure emerging from the darkness. They finally reached the surface, marking the entrance with a flag to indicate the tunnel had been searched and cleared. My father recalls this as the most gut-wrenching, horrific experience of his 2 years in Vietnam, a true scary story that still haunts him. This tale serves as a chilling reminder of the horrors of war, the unseen dangers lurking in the shadows, and the courage of those who face them. It is one of those scary stories that leaves you with chilling scares and a sense of unease. This is one of those true scary stories that leaves you with chilling scares and a sense of unease. Second story. In the realm of true horror stories, this is a disturbing tale that unfolded during my time in the Air Force. My journey began at Laughlin Air Force Base in Texas for basic training, followed by technical school at Shepherd Air Force Base. Upon graduation, I was assigned to McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey as an aerospace mechanic. My initial assignment was the night shift, which wreaked havoc on my sleep schedule. My responsibilities were mundane, involving the transportation of clean parts like anti-ice valves, ignitors, ignition exciter sensors, and more from the warehouse to the flight line. The work was monotonous, especially during the night hours, and often involved a lot of idle time. One night, around 4 a.m., I found myself waiting for a colleague, who I'll refer to as Mark, to deliver some parts to the flight line. Mark was unusually late, and my attempts to reach him via text and calls were unsuccessful. Eventually, I received a call from Mark's number, but the voice on the other end was unfamiliar. The man claimed to have found Mark's phone outside the base. Concerned, I decided to meet the stranger at a nearby location he suggested. As I drove towards the meeting point, I remembered that Mark had shared his location with me. The location indicated that Mark's phone was near the meeting point, raising questions about the stranger's intentions. Upon reaching the location, a deserted parking lot, I called Mark's number again. The man answered in a hushed tone, confirming his presence in the parking lot. His next question sent chills down my spine. "Are you alone?" His figure, partially visible behind the tree line, was a chilling scare. Sensing danger, I retreated to my car and drove back to the base. I immediately informed my supervisor about the scary true story unfolding, only to learn that Mark was safe and with him. Mark revealed his encounter with a stranger outside a convenience store who requested a ride back to the base. The stranger had attacked Mark during the ride, attempting to drag him out of the car. Mark managed to escape, leaving his phone behind in the struggle. We reported the incident to the police and went to the location where the attack occurred. However, the man was nowhere to be found, and Mark's phone was no longer traceable, possibly destroyed by the man. This true stalker story serves as a reminder of the unpredictable and dangerous individuals that lurk in the shadows, ready to turn ordinary situations into scary stories. Who knows what could have happened if either of us had ended up in those woods with that man? This is one of those true scary stories that leave you with chilling scares and a sense of unease. Third story. In my tenure as a Marine, I was assigned various duties, but the one I found least appealing was the graveyard patrol. There was a period when I was among the few assigned to the overnight shift at a nearby memorial cemetery. As you might expect, it was a quiet shift with little activity. Interestingly, despite the cemetery's remote location, flanked by dense forests on all sides, and the fact that I was working the literal graveyard shift, I found the job more soothing than eerie or unsettling. I was the sole person in the cemetery until my relief arrived around 4 a.m., marking the end of my shift. On one such regular night, nearing the end of my shift, I was patrolling near the perimeter fence where some of the older headstones were located. I was prohibited from using my phone during my shift. If I were caught using it, I would face disciplinary action. Despite the low risk of getting caught, given that there was hardly anyone around except me, I made it a point to adhere to this rule. So my shift mostly involved walking around and observing old headstones. However, on this particular night, while patrolling past some of the older headstones, I began to hear a woman's humming. It was a calming, soothing kind of humming, but it didn't soothe me because no one was supposed to be in the cemetery at that hour. It was more a cause for concern. I started following the sound of the humming, which seemed to be coming from behind a deliberately planted line of thick trees with vines and bushes sprouting from their sides. Instead of walking around the long wall of trees, I squeezed through the vines and bushes to the other side, injuring myself in the process. As I struggled to make it to the other side, the humming abruptly stopped, leaving me alone in the silence once again, not even the sound of a cricket to break the silence. I walked closer to the edge of the memorial property by the woods. There were a few large mausoleum-like structures, and I could distinctly hear some kind of buzzing sound coming from one of them. I stepped up the 3 white steps into the structure. The small door didn't have any locks on it. I had never been inside any of these structures until this point. I was mistaken in my assumption that they were mausoleums. I still don't know what their purpose was, perhaps some kind of memorial building for deceased veterans in the cemetery. As I was inside that cold, dark structure, I could feel the hairs on my arms begin to stand up as I got goosebumps for reasons I wasn't sure of just yet. That buzzing sound was coming from inside the structure, but it almost seemed like it was coming from beneath my feet. I looked down at the wooden floor, and there were tiny round holes in each plank of wood. They seemed big enough to look through, but it was way too dark down there to see what lay below the floorboards. I had an idea. I positioned my phone on the floorboard just right so that the flashlight would shine light into the hole in the wood, and I would look through one of the other holes. I lay basically flat on the floor with my head pressed up to the wood. When I looked, I expected to see nothing at all. but I saw what appeared to be the top of a woman's head. And as if she knew I started looking immediately, she looked up at me through the hole. I only saw her face for maybe half a second before I fell backward and let out a blood-curdling scream. I sprinted back to the parking lot and called the guy who was supposed to relieve me soon. I told him to meet me now. When he showed up, I tried to convince him that I was telling the truth about what I'd seen in that little building. He humored me by coming with me to it, and I repeated what I did earlier with my phone flashlight. He looked through multiple holes but saw nothing. I had to check for myself, and he was right. It was just some small, empty-looking space underneath the structure. I spent the rest of the shift with him. I left at 4 on the dot. I know he didn't believe me. I wouldn't have believed me either. I'm sure it's a possibility that it was a hallucination as a result of my lack of sleep. But I also believe it's a possibility that I witnessed a spirit or something completely supernatural. I heard so many older Marines and veterans tell of supernatural experiences they had while serving. I don't know who the woman that I saw could have been if it truly wasn't my imagination, but it chills me to the bone to imagine it having been one of the women buried in the cemetery.